Hi, these are just some thoughts in hindsight on our Nearpod training. Um, so I went ahead and opened up the Google Classroom just so it'd be easier to kind of talk about it and think through it. Um, Probably the first change that I would make is that I would not use Google Classroom again. I chose the platform because I know a lot of K through 12 schools are having teachers have to use it. And so I thought it'd be a good platform to kind of get familiar with. I did already know kind of how it worked because it's what the classroom that I was student teaching in was using. But it definitely has limitations. And from an instructional design standpoint, it probably was not a very good choice. I think you mentioned this in your video that it has some issues with ADA accessibility. Because it is Google, I would kind of like to think that if people have their Google account set to have certain accommodations, that Google Classroom would maybe be able to handle some of that. And because it's so widely used for education, it seems like they should have options for that. But um, I couldn't really find a lot about that when we were going through the design. And as you also mentioned, it doesn't have a splash page, which tends to be fine for longer term classes because people figure out where things are. But it's definitely annoying for a short term training where a splash page would be super helpful, or for orientation. If it's an asynchronous class and you don't get the chance to actually walk people through the site. So not having splash page is definitely a big limitation. I kind of tried to use this stream post as the splash page, a super tiny one. But it would have been great if I could have linked from that post to module one, and I couldn't find a way to like make links that would self-reference in the Google Classroom. That would be really helpful, but I think it's just not a feature that Google has. And by the time we kind of put all that together, it wasn't really, we didn't really have time to think about trying to switch it over to another platform and figured we would just take it as a learning opportunity. So that's what we've done. Um, but I do really like in Google Classroom how you can organize information really logically within the classwork section. It's probably going to take a minute to load because my internet sucks. So I do really love how you can create topics and then sort everything under topics. I think it's a really easy way to kind of lay things out. Honestly, I like it better than Canvas for that reason. And then that you can look on the side and just kind of really get a quick glance of all of the modules. We made sure to label each one with the number first rather than the name, so that if you're looking on the side, it's easy to tell that they're in the right order and how they are ordered. Again, we kind of tried to use the start here as like something of a splash page, but it's just not the same. And it is a bummer that you can't incorporate graphics into it. You also can't really have videos that are embedded within it. It would be awesome if you didn't have to go to YouTube to view some of these videos, but that seems to be all that Google Classroom really has to offer. Also, when we were designing the course, it wasn't clear to me that this tab would be on the side. So I should have referenced that instead of saying, go back to the classwork page and get to module one. I should have just said, look over on the side for module one. But when you're in the teacher view, you can't really see that. So anyways, hopefully that wasn't too much of an issue. And then, we tried to do the Google Classroom, or the Bitmoji Classroom, excuse me, just to add something of like a fun interactive thing. But I think we basically just tried to do like 3 different types of splash pages and do each of them as like individual components that should have been all together. And that made it kind of confusing and I think put too much information in too many different places. So, lessons learned. But speaking of like the actual Nearpod side of things, oh, that's not what I wanted. Can just go ahead and open that up if it'll load. We definitely also learned some serious limitations of Nearpod that made designing this training in a way that was the best practices for instructional design really hard. One of the biggest ones that I guess is really not that big a deal, but really annoyed me is that a lot of the alternative color options on Nearpod just were so not ADA compliant, like orange on white or green on blue, and things that were just like really difficult to imagine someone with any sort of disability trying to access that. So we ended up having to go with the white on black text for all of our Nearpod slides. And I just really did not like the look of it very much. Initially, we designed everything in like a white on navy and thought that maybe that would be okay. But the navy wasn't a solid, it was textured. And so we figured that it was just best to avoid putting text on any sort of textured image for an ADA compliant standpoint. So that was a definite issue we had. I'm sorry, this is really not loading for me. Some other things. Oh, so we ended up having probably too much text on a lot of our Nearpod slides, I realized in hindsight. And it was a little tough, partially with my internet, although even when I'd go to the library, I had a lot of issues with getting graphics and videos and multimedia to actually save on Nearpod. I don't know why, it was just kind of hard to upload things at times. So I tried to add audio overlays to a lot of my slides with text on them, and some of them uploaded and some of them just never would, even if they were really short, like 10 seconds, even if I was at the library. So I don't know if that was a Nearpod glitch or something on my end, but that was a feature that I had really been hoping to make more use of, to have pretty much every slide have both the audio and the text for at least like some sort of, change up of format, but it just didn't quite work out. And also with images, because Nearpod's slide format is set, you can only have one thing on the slide or two things on the slide or four things on the slide. It was hard sometimes to incorporate images into text or incorporate videos onto the page if you couldn't quite get the proportions right on how much text to other things you wanted to have. So, just some limitations. I think that in the future, I would probably create my Nearpod content in Google Slides so that it would hopefully be a little bit easier to just like make the slides themselves look nice. Because the Nearpod content, it didn't bother me so much that, a lot of their activities are white on black, or if they have pictures, they're really small, but at least it's an interactive activity, so it's not quite as annoying. I think that my page might finally be loading. Oh no, it's stopped again. Okay, well, I'll just give you my face to look at then, I guess, because it doesn't seem like it wants to work out. Okay. Oh, and as soon as I say that, it loads. So just kidding. Okay. Just join in. I'm hoping that we made it pretty easy for people to actually access the Nearpod lessons themselves. Again, I think we could have done more internal referencing within Google Classrooms to make sure people navigated that all right and told them, return to the classroom when you're done with this module. But I guess I sort of just assumed that that was automatic, that when people hit a stop point with Nearpod, they would go back to the Google Classroom and move on to Module 2, but that maybe needed some explicit instruction. Yeah, and then probably one last thought is that a lot of the instructions we did not repeat all that often, and I think that could have been difficult in hindsight to navigate. We tried to, with the assignment uploading, reiterate those instructions 2 or 3 times, but we maybe didn't reiterate enough that when you're done with the module in Nearpod, you should go back to Google Classroom, and we just didn't quite have all of our instructions maybe reiterated enough. And here you can see the black on white that I really did not like. I also couldn't find a way to add alt text for images, which would be a big ADA compliance issue. So again, maybe that's a scenario where using Google Slides might help. Yeah, this is an example of a slide that I thought was going to have an audio overlay, but it just never uploaded, even though I was just trying to say this like one sentence. I was pretty happy with like some of the graphics that I made in Canva to kind of try to make it a little bit prettier. So this is more the color scheme I was hoping we could go with um, for a lot of the module. And it didn't work out that way, but it was a good, exercise in using Canva and trying to kind of make some consistent formatting and um, kind of mimic like these aspects of Nearpod to sort of hopefully make it easier on people to navigate. So overall, I think it was a pretty successful training. I think we included a lot of things. I think we did a good job of showing people multiple instances of each activity, walking them through how to create them. I think we did in pretty good detail. Um, things like adding this arrow to show things. I was pretty proud of a lot of that. Um, yeah, and I think in the future I would definitely use Nearpod and I would definitely use Google Classroom when I need to, and I feel a lot more confident on using them. But it's also opened my eyes to some things that they don't do so well. So a mix of good and bad, a mix of lessons learned and things to know for next time. So that is basically my reflection on our training.